Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and today we're talking about the Janome 8002D Serger. In this video, I'm going to show you the basic operations of this machine. So to start with, when you are serging a seam, now I have all four different colors here so you can see what thread does what. This seam is a well-formed seam. Notice that the looper threads meet right here on the edge. And there's a little bit of slack in the looper threads. That's normal. It should be that way. That way it doesn't scrunch up your seam allowance. It just gives it a nice amount of slack. Your needle threads, you can just barely see them on the bottom side. They form from the top. And if you can barely see them on the bottom side, that's normal. And that should be that way because that will give you a little bit of stretch when you're sewing stretch fabrics. Okay, so the way you change the tensions is these four knobs. If, for instance, this knob is too loose, you're going to get these threads showing through like that. So if you see those like that, it could be that this knob is too loose. Another thing is, possibly when you were threading your machine, or if you did the tie-off method for threading, you need to make sure, hang on to the thread tail and give this a little pull. Do that on all four threads. That will make sure that the thread is into the tension discs on each of them. And then, of course, when you're serging, make sure that you have your presser foot down because that engages the tension discs onto the thread. Another possible problem with tension is with the loopers. Now, here's an example of where I had my lower looper, that's this one right here, a little bit too tight, and my upper looper a little bit too loose. And notice how it's kind of pulled down to the other side. If you look carefully, you can also see the lower looper being tight has also pulled that blue needle thread up a little bit. So it's kind of a balance here. Work with your different tensions until you get them just right, and then just leave them that way. Okay. So for basic serging, most of the time what you're going to use your machine for is to sew a seam, trim, and overcast, all in one step. That's what makes sergers wonderful. If you're starting out with two pieces of fabric, lift up your presser foot. Now notice also I have the machine cycled to where the needles are up and the cutter blade is up a little bit. If your cutter blade is down, you can't quite get that your fabric up to the needles very well. So you want to get it. You won't be able to get it all the way up to the needles, but you can get it so it's underneath the cutter blade. See, I just lifted up the toe with my finger. You can lift up the presser foot, but it's really easier and quicker just to lift up that toe. Now, if you're just sewing the edge of some fabric, one piece, you can just put that right up to there and start sewing. It'll catch it and pull it right through. But the reason why you can cut it off like that. The reason why I suggested that you lift up that presser foot and put it right up to the cutter blade is because if you have two layers, just putting it up like this, especially on your thicker fabric, could cause the presser foot to push that top layer forward a little bit while the feed dogs are pulling the lower layer back. So that's why I like to lift it up a little bit, and that gives that nice bite into the fabric so it's hanging on. Now, I'm going to show you how to seal the ends of your seam. Sergers do not have a backstitch button like your regular sewing machine does, or a backstitch lever. So to seal your seam, the thread tail needs to be incorporated into the seam. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So to start with, kind of go slow, and then when you get close to the edge of your fabric, just roll your hand wheel towards you in a counterclockwise fashion so that you have made about two full stitches into the fabric. Leave your needles down, lift up the presser foot, and smooth out the thread tail. Now what I mean by that is your thread tail has four threads in it. It has the two needle threads, which are straight, and the two looper threads, which are looped. And so you want to move those looper threads along the thread tail until you have it nice and straight. At that point, hold this around the front. Make sure that the thread tail is going in front of the cutter. You don't want it above or to the right of the cutter, or else it won't cut it off, because we want to cut that thread tail off. So move it here. I like to make sure I'm pulling it down a little bit, because that makes sure that the thread cutter cuts it off. Then we lower this, hang on to this just lightly until it cuts it right off. And that incorporates that thread tail right into the seam. Now you've sealed this part of the seam. What about the end of it? So I'm going to show you what to do. At this point, you want to leave a nice long thread tail of about 3 inches. Then take your big-eyed darning needle. So you should have a big needle like this. You can use a yarn darner. Anything that has a large eye to it will work just fine. And you take the eye end of the needle, put it through about 1 inch worth of stitches, about like that. And then rather than trying to poke that raw end through there, I just fold my thread tail in half and poke that through the eye of the needle. Do a little bit better job there. There we go. All right. So I've got the thread tail through there. Now I'm going to pull a little bit of slack here. I need that loop of slack so I can pull this right through the stitches. And then you can just cut off the end of that tail. And now we have sealed both ends of our seam. Now, for the beginning part, remember how I showed you how you pull that around? You want to stop stitching right about here. But let's say you forgot to do that and you're all the way down here. You can use that tie-off, that thread sealing method like you did on the end. You can use that up here. Now if you pull your thread tails through between the layers, that's just fine. In fact, that's a preferable method if you're going to have your serging show on the outside of your project. Okay, now I want to show you something else about sergers. You can see a little bit of the blue thread here. Let's have a good example here. Let's show you a little bit on this one here. My beige fabric. Most of the time you want to have your thread matching your fabric. And I would recommend getting 4 spools of whites, 4 spools of black, and 4 spools of gray. And that'll cover almost all of your serging needs, because most of your serging is going to be on the inside of your garment. Okay, so give you an example of what a serger seam will look like. And here you can see the blue threads are showing a little bit. If that was beige thread, you would hardly even see it at all. So that's about the right stitch length. Stitch length has to do with this upper knob here. And the stitch length will be determined by how big of a bite the feed dogs take on each stitch. So you can do a lower stitch length by moving this down to a lower number, or a higher one by moving it to higher. As you move this knob, you can feel it kind of sinks down into that 3. That's your normal stitch length for serging, the normal garment stitch length. And you can also make it longer or shorter, like if you were going to do a rolled hem or just a fine short stitch. In fact, I'll show you what that looks like. Let's go down here to about 1. It goes through underneath the needle slower because the feed dogs aren't pulling it along as fast. But you can see it kind of fills it in. Makes a nice even, you can even use decorative thread to make that really stand out like that. Okay, I'm going to move this back to here. Now the differential feed is good for sewing knits. If you tend to get waviness happening, you'll probably notice this when you're sewing with your regular sewing machine on knits. Sometimes your knit tends to get stretched out. Well, this is the knob that you need to tighten that up a little bit. It also has a neutral position right here at 1. So if we move this a little bit tighter, you're going to get a little bit tighter. I'm going to show you on just my woven fabric what that does. I'm going to move this all the way up to 2, right like that. You can see how it kind of gathers it up a little bit. If you needed to gather, what you could do is find your needle threads and then just pull them up a little bit tighter. Also, you can tighten these here. Let's do that. I'm going to go on up to 7 and a longer stitch length here. Now I changed those thread tensions, so I want to lift this up, hang on to my thread tail, give this a good pull just to make sure the thread tension is engaged. Let's go over here. You can see it gathering right here. See? So that's a factor of two things. It's the thread tension and it's also the differential. Well, so I'm going to explain to you how that works in a minute. And it makes a pretty decent gather. Again, pulling on the thread tails of the needle threads can make it gather to the size that you need to if you're putting this on another piece of fabric. I'm going to put these back to neutral right here where it was. Okay, the differential feed, the way this works, it works similarly to the stitch length, except that it only affects the front feed dogs instead of both pairs of feed dogs. So on a neutral setting right here at 1, both sets of feed dogs are pulling evenly. On a tighter setting, now the front feed dogs are pulling a little bit more. So you can see with a knit that tends to get stretched out, if you move this up a little bit, say to 1.5, depending on the knit, because there's a lot of different kinds of knits, so sew through a sample, you'll notice it looks like it's gathering here, but it will straighten out and flatten out really nicely without being wavy. That's the beauty of having a differential feed on your serger. Another thing you can do with a knit that's doesn't curl, it just lays nice and flat, or like a rib knit. You can also turn your differential knob the other way and get that nice lettucey edge if you're looking for that on the edge of something. It works especially well with your rolled hem. But for regular serging, move this right back to where you kind of feel that click right there at 1. That's going to be your normal standard serging, which for the most part, that's what I use on my projects. Okay, so that's your basic serger operations on this machine. Thank you for watching. We have lots of other videos. If this video was helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you have comments or questions, you can leave those in the area down below. So thanks for watching. See you later. Bye.